2. The Last Bridge In. Mirth sprang up in her bed, her breath shallow, her brow sweaty, and her heart beating a mile a minute. She racked her fogged, sleepy mind for understanding. She was at an inn. She was waking up. She must have been dreaming. In her hand she felt the dagger that she always kept close when she slept. Her eyes darted from corner to corner, irrationally certain that something lurked somewhere ready to pounce at her. Images flashed before her eyes. Blood and pain, death and suffering, her father dead at her feet. She held her breath for just a moment, tears welling in her eyes. Then she let it out slowly as her limbs stopped their trembling and calm returned to her demeanor. She summoned her courage to place her feet over the edge of her bed, despite being sure that creatures of darkness lurked beneath. Her steps were deliberate and slow, but she made it to the mirror and basin the inn provided. She splashed the cold water on her face, closing her eyes and letting it run down her chest. The sharp cold on her skin soothed her. She opened her eyes and stared into her own reflection with a look of determination. Those days are over, she thought. You are stronger. She proceeded to get dressed slowly, intentionally taking the time necessary to let logic return to her mind. She needed to find her center again, to regain a composure that suited her far better than the fear-rattled mind of a child. One day she would wake calm and in control. One day she would sleep without being plagued by nightmares. One day she would believe the words she told herself every morning. Mirth pulled her hood up around her head as she walked out into the bright morning sun. Already this town bustled with people beginning their day. Sleeping in meant less work accomplished by sundown and was reserved only for the richest and most leisurely of folk. This small town had few to fit the description. She could feel suspicious eyes glancing at her as she walked down the street. She knew that she was a strange sight, dressed in her forest green cloak, hood up to brace against the sun. Let them be suspicious. She did not care. It had been a long time since she had lived among groups of people, and she had long since grown out of a healthy sense of shame and need to fit in. Those things seemed so petty in the shadow of much greater concerns. Yet, here she was, for the first time in ages, choosing to associate with a group. This prospect gave her undue pause. Considering any number of dangers they may face in this journey, the immediate fear to Mirth was being surrounded by people she did not know, and could therefore not afford to trust. Many people had been fortunate enough to have never learned what Mirth knew too well, that this world was too evil a place to have a trusting spirit. Not everyone would betray you, sure, but danger lurked still around every corner. She was the last to arrive at the stable. Many sat already on the backs of their horses, appearing anxious to get on the road. Caden stood with his accustomed sullen-faced look at the edge of the stables, observing. She knew that he intended only to send them off as a courtesy, and that he would not be leaving with them. He had seen far too many journeys to take another, though she wondered if he was the sort who yearned for danger. Perhaps it was difficult for him to have the self-control to decline the chance for one more grand adventure. This she would likely never know, for he was certainly not the kind to open up to strangers, and for that matter, neither was she. "Ah, welcome to the party, sleepyhead. Have a hard time getting out of bed?" Adamir shouted, bounding towards her with a stupid grin spread wide across his face. Mirth could feel her lips involuntarily curl at the abrupt and uncalled-for greeting from the over-eager Magi. She answered his rude accusation with naught but a glance, which served to temporary silence. The wiry fellow. She wondered at how such a strange personality could have fit in among the Hand of Fire, a group notorious for working in the shadows and dispensing swift and unrelenting justice against evildoers. As she climbed into the saddle of the horse that the stable master had brought to her, she took a quick glance back in his direction. For a moment he appeared crestfallen at his failed attempt to converse with her, but quickly he regained his foolish smile, nearly bouncing as he walked over to his own horse. Mirth shook her head at the sight and wondered how he could be so cheery. Perhaps he had lived a life of luxury and did not know what it was to suffer. Maybe it was naivete that afforded him the demeanor of a bubbly child. Either way, he unsettled her. A more ominous explanation gnawed at her subconscious. Perhaps this was his way to hide more sinister motivations behind a face of lies. She prepared for the worst from him. That way, at the very least, he could not disappoint her. Adamir couldn't break her trust if she didn't give it to him. All right then, Rakan said at the head of the group. I suppose there's no time like the present to be on our way. Mirth turned and followed on her horse as the group began to file out towards the edge of the village. Already it seemed that this Rakan would take it upon himself to be the leader of the group. Mirth would not challenge him. The head of the group was a dangerous place to be. She did not covet leadership. As they left the village and again entered the untamed wilderness, Mirth felt a degree of peace come over her. This was her territory. She knew what to expect from the forest. She knew what lay there waiting for her. It was far more predictable than people. She allowed herself to drift to the tail end of the group. It seemed better that they all be in front of her. That way she could keep an eye on all of them. They could not catch her by surprise. After hours in the saddle, Mirth began to lose herself in the monotonous rhythm of riding. She had never traveled on horseback before, preferring instead to keep her feet on the ground and to remain small and hard to see among the trees of the forest. At first, sitting on horseback was an uncomfortable affair, but after a full day of riding, with only a few rest stops along the way, she adapted. The scenery continued to pass by, tree after tree. It hardly seemed that they were moving, as the forest continued in uniformity. She could feel the horse's shoulder blades beneath her, swaying back and forth. It was almost soothing. "Hey there," Adamir greeted her, startling her from her stupor. She cursed herself for being caught so unawares. He must have fallen back intentionally to speak to her. She said nothing in return. "Okay, well, you seem like a reserved kind of person, and I don't want to be a bother or anything, but I figure we'll all be traveling together for a while, and you're the only person so far who I don't really know anything about. I figured maybe we could chat while we travel." "There's not much to know," she replied dismissively. "I'm here to work and not for idle chatter." She shot him a quick glance and then returned her attention to the road ahead. He paused for a moment, pensive. "Well, all right then. I'll at least tell you about myself." She sighed. He ignored her. "As you know, my name is Adamir, and I am a member of the Hand of Fire. I was born and raised in the fair forest city of Gondolin, where my parents were simple folk. My father was a historian, my mother a musician in the great halls. I had a fairly unremarkable childhood." There it is, she thought. He lived a cushy life in a safe Magi city. This is why he can live life so casually and be of such cheerful demeanor. Yet still, this did not explain how he had become part of a ruthless vigilante group. When she remained silent, he continued. "I bet you're wondering how I joined the Hand of Fire. A lot of people ask me, how did Dervish put it? Right. How did an insufferable twit like you join an elite group like the Hand of Fire?" Despite herself, Mirth could not suppress a chuckle. She felt heat rush to her face in shame. Pleased, he continued. "Anyway, it all started when—" "Enough," she interrupted, with more force than intended. "Is there no end to your inane chatter? Leave me in peace." Shock registered on his face, and he went silent. Adamir nodded and spurred on his horse. "If that's what you want, I'll leave you be," he said, crestfallen. Regret crept into Mirth's heart at the sight of his disappointment. Had she been too forceful? Should she have entertained his desire for camaraderie? What was the harm in getting to know these people that she would be traveling so long with? No, she thought. I am right to be abrupt with him. He needs to understand that we are not friends, that we are merely working together. She reminded herself why she was so cold, why she cut herself off from people. She knew it was unreasonable, but nonetheless it remained true. If she never let anyone else into her heart, she would never again have to lose someone that she cared about. She didn't know if she could survive such loss again. "Ahead, I think I see lodgings," Nolendil called from his position near the head of the group. Mirth concentrated her gaze forward and saw the light from a lamp on the outside of a tall building. She could hear faintly the revelry that went on inside. Her heart sank at the prospect of again placing herself among numerous people. Yet still, as the sun went down and the air grew colder, she knew that it was for the best to have real shelter. As they grew closer, the building's sign came into view. In bold letters, it declared this building to be the Last Bridge Inn. The inn appeared to have been a recent construction, its walls with nary a blemish, its windows bright and clear, spilling the flickering light of the lamps inside out on the well-traveled road. "Strange," said Rakan. "I don't remember there being an inn here in my previous travels. Then again, it has been many years since I last came this way, and it appears to be a new building." "It makes sense. This is a well-traveled road since the unification," Inlysian added. "Well, in any case, I grow weary of this fair steed I've been saddled with," Dervish said. He paused and then chuckled. No pun intended, of course. But let us go in. I could stand some mead and some good rest." "Hear, hear," Bellathor cried enthusiastically. As they dismounted and began to hitch their horses to the posts outside, a growing sense of disquiet entered Mirth's heart. Something about this inn seemed off to her. Then again, she thought, I would likely feel the same way about any place. She allowed herself to dismiss the feeling, but remained still vigilant in case of danger. They entered the bustling inn and were immediately enveloped in a haze of smoke. Laughter and chatter filled the air, as did the pleasing aroma of freshly cooked meats and quality honey mead. Standing near the door was a portly, bearded man, age showing in his eyes. Yet still, there remained there a spark of energy. "Ha ha! Welcome, fine traveling folks, to the Last Bridge Inn. We'd love to get you some hot food, some cold brew, and a nice soft bed to melt away your troubles. What say you? How can I make your stay here the best you ever had?" he said, punctuating his final statement with a hearty, exaggerated wink. "My friend, that sounds like a wonderful idea," Adamir said with a smile, feeding off the energy of the enthusiastic innkeeper. Everyone in the group in turn either stated or nodded their assent, and they were waved to a table big enough to seat all of them. It was strange, but the inn had a calming effect on Mirth. She wondered at how she could have felt so off-put by it at first. The more she sat and ate and drank, the more her worries and fears began to melt away. Suddenly she found herself more relaxed than she could remember feeling. The inn became a haze of joy and laughter, and she found herself laughing at dervishes' jokes and chatting along with the crowd, although what they spoke of she could not remember. Soon the night wore on, and one by one they found their way to their rooms. The stupor of drink was apparent as Mirth stumbled down the hall to the room that had been assigned as hers. She threw open the door and nearly vaulted into the soft down bed. Peaceful, for the first time in her memory, she drifted into a quiet sleep. Mirth awoke with a start, drenched in sweat and shaking with fear. Her heart raced a mile a minute, and she entered the familiar haze of her daily waking, though now it appeared to still be night. This time seemed more vivid than all the others combined. Her vision cleared, and her heart dropped. Floating before her was a ghastly apparition that filled her heart with a deeper sense of dread than even she was accustomed to feeling. Hanging loosely around its form was a pitch-black robe that seemed even in the dark of her room to be unnaturally dark, as if light itself lived in fear of this creature and avoided it. Its hood came down over its face, obscuring what Mirth was certain was a face she never wished to see. She doubted that any creature lived past seeing this thing's features. From its sleeves emerged two strange gray hands with ghastly, attenuated fingers, each ending in sharp, fragmented fingernails. For a moment that seemed to last hours, Mirth remained fixed and silent, unable to summon the will to fight or flee. Her entire world was enraptured by the strange creature, and she was all too acutely aware that it intended to destroy her. It inched closer and closer to her, a strange hissing sound emanating from under its hood. Just as all hope seemed lost, she reached deep down inside and remembered the eyes of her father, staring up at her lifelessly. Blood pooled around his body, and her strength of will returned to her. She cried out involuntarily in a guttural battle cry as she reached for the dagger by her bedside. If she was to die, it would be with determination and a fighting spirit. The foul creature motioned with its gnarled fingers towards her dagger as she began to swing it with all her force, and to her horror, the weapon shattered into pieces, flying in every direction. Pain pierced through her fogged mind as tiny bits of metal shot into her face and chest. She instinctively grabbed her hand as blood began to seep down her cheeks. Using the pain as a motivator, Mirth rolled from her bed to where her equipment lay ready for the coming morning. She grabbed her bow, and with the speed of expertise bred from a life of experience, she nocked an arrow and shot at the ghoul. The creature almost casually moved out of the way and approached her as she sat on the floor. Despair again filled her heart, and she wondered at how she could defeat so capable an opponent. "Satio!" a voice cried with unnatural tone from somewhere outside of her room. Suddenly, Mirth was blinded by a flash of fire that filled the room with heat and light. A horrible scream of pain erupted from the robed creature as it burst into flames. With great speed, it flew out of the wall behind her, out into the night. Its high-pitched wails continued to pierce her eyes until it was far away. "Are you all right?" Elysian shouted, running to her side. She recoiled from him, still overwhelmed by fear and unwilling to trust. Her eyes darted around the room, and she was filled with disbelief. Her bed was a broken mess, the mattress dark and stained by years of exposure to the elements. There was no roof to speak of, the walls themselves half fallen down in age. I don't... What is going on? She managed to say after an interval of silence. The other members of their team began to file into the room, all wearing confused looks on their faces. It appears that we were tricked by a malicious spell of some sort, Elysian replied softly. One too powerful for even I to see through. I am sorry. Well then, what use are you? Dervish cried out in anger. Quiet, Mirth shouted, her voice hoarse. Without him, we could not have defeated such a foul creature. My arrows did nothing but inconvenience him, and with but the wave of his hand, he destroyed my dagger. She touched her face and felt the blood there. Worse yet, this would seem to lend strong evidence to the possibility of some sorcerer operating in Malcheth, Rakan said. Who else would have the will and desire to summon such a thing into their service? It seems likely, then, if that is the case, that whoever the sorcerer is, he knows that we are coming, Nolendil said, worry clear in his voice. The room remained silent for a moment, as the weight of that possibility entered everyone's mind. What hope do we have of facing down creatures that could disarm us at will? Rakan asked, exasperatedly. We would march to war only to have our people slaughtered with little means of defending themselves. You are powerful, Elysian, but you are one wizard, and the others of your order have not been seen for years. Elysian rubbed his chin pensively, eyeing the rotten floorboards beneath his feet as he pondered their quandary. None were willing to break the silence that permeated the room. They waited, hoping that some hidden wisdom would emerge to lend strength to their cause. I have heard tell, Elysian finally said, of an enchantment that could protect us from such magic, an ancient spell used in the oldest of wars to prevent creatures of shadow from dominating the battlefield with their blade-shattering spells. Oh, good then, let's use that, Adamir said enthusiastically. Well, we could, if we knew where to find it, Elysian said quietly. My leads on the enchantment went dry long ago. Well, if that be the case, Dervish replied, what hope do we have? Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And leave a comment down below if you are an Adamir or a Mirth. See you next time.